Auzubillahi Minashaitanirrajim, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ziauddin Sardar Saab for such an intellectually stimulating talk, and thank you for putting me in a very tough situation. Khurram Saab, I'll start with him. He was someone who has inspired millions of people across the world. I come across his books that have been translated in multiple languages. I saw a book which was translated in Latin. This Jamaat party of the Tabligh Jamaat, they were somewhere in South America, and they came across this masjid which had been closed for decades, and it was in mud and dust. It was in dust, and nobody had been there for the longest time. And they told me that when they went to the mimbar, they saw a few books, actually booklets, and on top there was a book by Khurram Murad, and it was not in Latin, it was in Spanish. And we also come across his books that have been published in Sri Lanka, in Maldives, and sometimes I search for his name online and I find people are sharing his quotes, living in the West, living in the Far East, living all over the world. So I think this is a contribution this is the sort of contribution which we ought to have, or this is a contribution which we all aspire to have, contribution through which even decades after your demise you can change the hearts of people and you can bring them to the right path. Because whatever quotes that are shared, whatever pictures that I see of books that he wrote, reminds people of the Creator, reminds people of the Almighty, and the writings bring the masses closer to Allah. So this is something which is a huge sadqa jariya, and he, I think, wasn't born in a very religious family, from whatever I've been told. His father was an engineer. He did engineering in 1908 from Rasool Engineering. His grandfather was also into construction and contracting, but he learned the deen from one of the greatest scholars of this era, and that is obviously Maulana Maududi. From a very young age he became inspired by him. He was at the time living in Bhopal, and his aunt used to read I think the digest at the time was Tarjumanul Quran, which used to issue. And at a very young age, I think at the age of 16, Maulana Maududi wrote his first book, which got a lot of critical acclaim. And that is how, in a very young age, his writings are very inspirational, and that is the seed, I think, that got planted in him. And he also Khurram Saab then became a member of the Islami Jamiyat Talaba. He was, I think, the second president of the IJT. He also wrote their constitution. But he was also, I think, he was always he had a great worldview. And that is how in the mid-50s, after completing his engineering from NED, he ended up in the US. And then we see later how he was a prisoner of war, how he wanted to fix things in Pakistan, reform the system, how he wanted to groom our youth, and not just our youth. By our youth, I don't mean Pakistani youth. He held training camps in South Africa. He held training camps in Malaysia. And a couple of years ago, Farooq Saab met the Malaysian Minister of Health, and he acknowledged, he said, whatever we are today is because of Khurram Saab. And he was able to inspire a lot of people. When he was in Leicester, he wanted to make Islam seem more relevant to contemporary times, because we see that Islam is often portrayed sometimes as a religion which is now maybe obsolete. But he's someone who really believed in the relevance of Islam, and from there on he established with the Khurshid Saab the Islamic Foundation in Leicester. They also established the Markfield Institute of Education, Higher Education, which groomed young Muslim men who worked in Europe, who worked in the UK, So whatever contributions he had, he did not have any personal agenda. His agenda was to bring about a global reform, and his agenda was to bring people closer to Allah, and that is something which earned him a lot of respect. And we see today that people remember him, and he still has a huge impact on a lot of people who are in top places today. So we remember him today, we acknowledge his services for Islam, for Pakistan, for the world, and we hope that some of his attributes we'll be able to take forward and emulate in our lives. So as we come to the close of this lecture, it is worth pausing not to summarize what has been said, but to reflect on what lies at the very heart of civilizational rise and decline. And these are some of my thoughts in the light of Khurram Saab's writings. So he consistently reminded us that civilizations do not collapse simply because they lack power. Civilizations do not collapse simply because they lack power, nor do they rise merely because they acquire it. They rise and they fall because they lose or regain their sense of purpose. So the sense of purpose, your direction is the main thing. For many of us here today, Khurram Murad was not just a scholar or was not just a thinker we read, but a moral compass that quietly shaped how we and millions of us try to live, lead and serve. Today, the condition of the Muslim world is often described in political terms, economic terms or strategic terms. But Khurram Murad insisted that these explanations remain superficial. The deeper crisis, he argued, is a crisis of direction, a loss of clarity about why we exist, what we are accountable for, and what ultimately deserves our loyalty. For him, any serious discussion about revival had to begin with the Quran, not as a symbol, not as a ritual, but as a living guide. In Way to the Quran, he stated with striking clarity, the Quran came to change life, not just to be chanted. For him, revival began when the Quran stopped being ceremonial and became decisive, when it shaped how Muslims understand success and failure, power and responsibility, life and death. Without this transformation of worldview, he warned, no amount of development, no amount of natural endowments, organization or reform can heal the Ummah. Khurram Saab was deeply wary of hurried revivalism, of activism that seeks results without first reforming the self. In the early hours, he wrote words that remain deeply unsettling and deeply relevant. No movement can rise above the moral level of its members. No movement can rise above the moral level of its members. This was not a call to withdraw from society. It was a call to discipline. He believed that inner reform, tazkiyah, is not a personal luxury, it is a civilizational necessity. And I remember in one of his booklets, Qaumo Ka Uruj o Zawal, he says that the collective deeds of countries, nations are dealt with by Allah in this world, and He gives them whatever retribution, whatever position they deserve based on their collective deeds. But for individual deeds, the retribution will be given on the day of judgment. So whatever position we see today of the Ummah is because of the collective deeds. Zia Sahab also shared in his talk wherever we fall on various indexes in terms of education, in terms of corruption, in terms of other areas. So when he spoke of Islamic Renaissance, Khurram Murad rejected both nostalgia and imitation. He warned against living in borrowed futures or imagined pasts. In his writings, he insisted the task is not to create Islamic history, but to recreate Muslims in the light of Islam. This distinction is crucial for the future of our civilization. A true Renaissance is not the repetition of old forms, nor the copying of dominant cultures. It is principled originality, rooted in revelation intellectually confident, morally anchored, and fully engaged with contemporary realities. Murad was also uncompromising on the ethics of revival. He repeatedly cautioned movements against shortcuts. Un-Islamic means can never produce Islamic ends. For him, justice, honesty, and sincerity were not secondary virtues, they were the guardrails of civilization. Any revival that compromises these corrodes itself from within, no matter how impressive its outward success may appear. These ideas, however, were never meant to remain in lectures or books. Khurram Saab wrote not to impress generations, but to prepare them for responsibility. In the final phase of his life, Khurram Murad distilled his entire civilizational vision into one uncompromising principle. In dying and living for Allah, which is his last will, written with full awareness of his approaching end, he wrote, "Let your living and your dying be for Allah alone. Let nothing else compete for your loyalty." So if you will have loyalty to the West, if you will have loyalty to Western ideas, if you will have loyalty to others apart from Islam, apart from Allah, then obviously you will not be able to get the success you are made for. This was his final definition of success, not dominance, not recognition, not historical applause, but ikhlas, a sincerity so complete that faith governs ambition, work, leadership, and legacy. Our future, therefore, will not be decided by numbers or rhetoric. It will be decided by whether Muslims once again put Allah at the center of their lives, individually and collectively, and allow that surrender to shape everything that we do. Knowledge, ethics, institution, governance, politics, technology, everything that we do has to be governed by putting Allah at the center of our lives. If this lecture has truly honored Khurram Murad, it is by reminding us that history does not change through noise, but through meaning, not through reaction, but through renewal, not through impatience, but through steadfast and sincere striving. I extend my sincere gratitude to our distinguished speakers and to all the participants. Thank you so very much for your patience and for listening to us and for engaging in these ideas. May Allah accept this effort, grant barakah in these reflections, and enable us not only to articulate these truths but to live them. May we be among those who honor our elders not by remembering their works alone, but by carrying their weight quietly, patiently, and sincerely into the work that Allah has placed before us. Thank you so very much.